No, you don't freak out just when the camera's here. Come on. Hello, and welcome to Beccasphere in the year 2022. Ain't that right, Rue? Rue's like, get me out of here. Oh, come on, Rue. You could be better than this. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beccasphere, where we talk about climate news and solutions. If you want to stay informed about the latest climate information, consider hitting that subscribe button below and ringing the bell so you don't miss every single time I post. And if you are a subscriber and haven't done so yet on either the form or on my Instagram story yet, I have a little survey below to help me improve my channel. Any feedback you could provide would be greatly appreciated. You have entered a climate recap where we discuss the latest climate news. I do these segments every 2 weeks. I have decided that I'm going to organize the news into 4 categories, which are climate change, which features extreme weather events, how hotter worlds impact society, tipping points, etc. Climate victories, which are policies, technology, divesting from carbon-intensive activities, activism, etc. Climate fails, which is investment in carbon-intensive activities, politics, misinformation, etc. And other fossil fuel fails, like air pollution, spills, plastic pollution, and their health and environmental impacts besides warming the globe. After these 4 segments, I'll add anything I want to include that doesn't fit into these categories, and I'll finish with my favorite climate victory point. So each section will be timestamped below, and make sure you stay till the end for my favorite victory point. This time, we will take a look at what happened the last 2 weeks of 2021, so December 18th to 31st. This video is brought to you by the people on Patreon who helped me pay for my equipment and the many new subscriptions that make this recap possible. Thank you. Now let's start with examples of extreme weather events and tipping points and how they impact society. Super Typhoon Ray slammed into the Philippines' southeastern island December 16th, killing at least 375 people and injuring at least 500. While the island nation is very familiar with typhoons, averaging about 20 a year, their season usually ends in October, so the timing of Ray was unusual. It was also the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines in 2021, with winds reaching 120 miles per hour, or 195 kilometers per hour for the rest of the world. While this particular storm hasn't been officially attributed to climate change, scientists say that climate change can result in wetter storms with stronger wind speeds. The following weekend, heavy rains and flooding in the Bahia region of Brazil broke 2 dams, resulting in at least 20 people killed and injuring 358, in addition to dismantling COVID and flu vaccination processes. Around 470,000 people from 116 towns have been displaced. Several officials say this is worse flooding than they have ever seen in the region. Quote, "We know rain can be seen as a blessing from God, but due to the ecological imbalance that we human beings have caused, there can be too much of it, causing serious damage." Southeast Africa wishes they had some of that water because they received below average rainfall the last 2 weekends of December, exacerbating dry conditions. The main regions experiencing this drought are Ethiopia, southern Somalia, eastern Kenya, and southern Madagascar. Then over in the US, wildfires swept through Boulder, Colorado, December 30th, burning hundreds of homes to the ground. While the cause of the wildfire remains unknown, unusually strong winds and drought stoked it to an unmanageable level, and those can most likely be attributed to climate change. The U.S. Financial Stability Oversight Committee issued a formal warning December 17th, considering climate change an emerging threat to the U.S. financial system. The council laid out how costs associated with extreme weather events could hurt property values and saddle related insurers, banks, and pensions with heavy losses. But like the other formal federal documents released recently, the warning did not provide any policy prescriptions, disappointing Democrats and environmental groups. And now over to the other top emitter. A new international study found that climate change could threaten China's food security by doubling crop pests and diseases by the end of the century, assuming the world reaches over 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by then. Warmer nighttime temperatures is the main factor for this result. In addition to having to support a giant country, China is the world's top producer of rice, wheat, and maize. There were other stories I found interesting, but I decided not to cover them here so I can work on dropping my video length. So at the end of each section, I will give you a slide with other stories I found interesting. So here's the climate change one. Now let's get into climate victories. Again, I'm going to hold off on saying my favorite one until the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. December was big for solar in the US. First, Massachusetts announced its plans to pilot test solar panels as highway sound barriers. The project will stretch a half-a-mile long Interstate 95 near Boston and will produce 800 megawatts, which is enough to power about 100 homes, though this power will go to the state's Department of Transportation. The state's government expects to save about $560,000 over the next 20 years from this, and it opens up another use and placement for solar in populated areas. Then Stanford announced the development of an ultra-thin, lightweight solar panel. The researchers discovered transition metal dichalcogenides. Oof, I butchered that. I'll put it up here. I even wrote it out phonetically and I still butchered it. Like, that's how talented I am. But basically they're called TMDs, and they absorb ultra high levels of sunlight captured compared to current solar panels on the market. So they can absorb way more of that energy. So this material is more effective than other solar panel technology, and it's 15 times thinner than a piece of paper. Imagine it on like drone wings or like the roof of EVs. Like, that's a lot of potential. And then President Biden approved 2 solar farms to be built in the California desert, which will generate enough electricity to power 132,000 homes. With these farms will come a 400 megawatt battery storage. The overall project will be paid for by the infrastructure bill. In another big move, the EPA finalized their toughest new vehicle emission standards yet. It would require new cars to get at least 40 miles per gallon by 2026. Officials say more stringent requirements by the EPA are to come as early as this year. Biden wants half of all cars sold in the US in 2030 to be EVs. And honestly, with the car companies preparing to make 2022 a very big year, I think that target can be very, very easily achieved. On December 16th, Oregon's Environmental Quality Commissions adopted final regulations for the state's Climate Protection Program, or CPP, which caps and reduces emissions from transportation fuels and natural gas usage starting now. The goal is to cut climate pollution by half by 2035, and the program complements Oregon's clean electricity standard passed in the summer, which works to cut emissions from the electricity sector by 80% by 2030. The Environmental Defense Fund says Oregon's policies are still not ambitious enough to reduce overall emissions by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030, but honestly, they're way better than what most states are doing. The CPP will also help protect communities, businesses, and ecosystems from extreme weather events. You can learn more about the program's overall goals and pitfalls by clicking the link in the source list, which will be linked in the description below. And over in Ohio and North Carolina, climate activists and environmental justice advocates have joined a gerrymandering fight, arguing that the new district lines being drawn by Republicans will give favor to fossil fuel interests and underrepresents the voices of communities of color. For those of you who don't know what gerrymandering is, it's basically the reason why our electoral college doesn't work well. The top party officials of a state can redefine district lines. Districts will then vote on their representatives. If this redistricting is done in a way that's meant to help a party in particular, it's called gerrymandering. Basically, define those districts strategically and a party can gain more members in the electoral college. This happens about every 10 years based on consensus data, and the consensus data for 2020 was not collected very well. Both parties have done gerrymandering to gain a leg up, but in this case, it would give Republicans more power and representation on the East Coast. This is concerning for climate movements of Ohio and North Carolina because as of now, Republican interests closely align with maintaining the status quo for fossil fuels. Analysts say that redistricting Ohio the way Republicans want would give them an advantage of 65% of the state's House races and 72% in the state's Senate races, even though only 54% of votes casted in Ohio over the last decade have actually supported the Republican Party. So you can see the percentage is not representative of the reality. The way Ohio and North Carolina are being redistricted also further reduces voices of colored communities, which are some of the most vocal people about environmental injustices. These redistrictings could make the difference for which party has control over the House and the Senate after this year's midterm elections. So if you think Biden is already having trouble passing anything through a split House and Senate, Democrats losing either or both of those to Republicans would basically be the death sentence for federal climate policy. Unless Republicans want to change their minds and care about one of the biggest issues, maybe not, okay? Okay, so those were the main ones I chose to talk about, and here is a list of other climate victories I found interesting. Remember to wait to the end for my favorite climate victory. And now we move on to climate fails, starting with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who has officially stated he would not support the Build Back Better Act. This would have been the biggest push by the federal government to drop emissions ever. Here's a graph that illustrates it well. President Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer still holds out hope that they can reason with the man, but honestly, my hope is pretty freaking low at this point. The Biden administration has made some questionable decisions in the last month as well. It was revealed that the executive order that I mentioned in the last climate recap to push the federal government to net zero by 2050 excluded a huge part of its influence: the military. The U.S. military has represented 70 to 80% of federal energy use since 2001 and consumes more petroleum than any other institution in the world. So by exempting them from the agreement, it makes the executive order way less effective. The Biden administration also offered a $1 billion loan guarantee to the Monolith Nebraska LLC to build a blue hydrogen plant. Blue hydrogen comes as a byproduct from natural gas. So basically by doing that, they're kind of just supporting fossil fuel industries. And it's the first loan from the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office, which was created by the infrastructure bill. The department says that this project, which will also support making black carbon needed for tires and other rubber products, will drop emissions associated with hydrogen and rubber because they're traditionally made from oil production. Hydrogen is commonly used in products like fertilizers, or it can be used as an energy generation and storage technique. So what's frustrating me the most about this is that the Department of Energy head and Reuters article both calls it clean hydrogen. Hydrogen that comes from a fossil fuel source cannot be clean. And natural gas is a fossil fuel source. We need to stop thinking that it's so much better than the other two because we've gotten more and more research to suggest that it's not. Another example of clean energy is considering wood as a form of biofuel. A new study out of Athens, Greece found that wood burners cause nearly half of urban air pollution cancer risk because they release the carcinogen polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. Another study published last year found that wood burning in homes was the main cause of small particle air pollution in the UK, despite only 8% of the population even having wood burners. So that's how potent it is. Both European governments and the US government are claiming burning wood is clean because trees can grow. But honestly, they're relying on carbon offsets in the form of growing new trees or future carbon capture technology that has not even been developed yet. Quote, "When the industry claims it's carbon neutral, it's saying we recognize there's CO2 coming out of the smokestacks, but it was instantaneously offset by a CO2 uptake somewhere else, and therefore it's not in the atmosphere. But that's not what's happening. If you burn a tree, it emits carbon right away. And if you grow a tree, it takes up carbon over a long time." Yeah, it can take like 82 years for a tree to basically uptake the amount of carbon that was burnt from another tree. Burning freshly cut wood chips, which are wet and far less energy dense than fossil fuels, can emit between 40 to 60% more carbon per megawatt hour of electricity than coal. So there's definitely a public health problem on the output. But over in Mississippi, Gloucester residents are having trouble breathing because they live next to a giant British wood chip making facility called Drax, the largest wood chip plant in the US. Drax logs in that area and then transports wood chips back to Europe to be burnt in power plants. And the process that turns trees into wood chips releases volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, that contribute to smog and ozone pollution, aggravated asthma and other lung conditions, cancer, and skin conditions. So like, what are we doing with this bullshit? Like, why are we even talking about wood as an option? It blows my mind. And the final climate fail, we look back at Google. Before COP26, the big UN climate conference in November, Google promised to stop allowing advertisements on sites that deny scientific consensus around climate change and to stop climate denial groups from running Google ads. But a new report from the Center for Countering Digital Hate found that Google's current policies are proving ineffective. For example, a common source of climate misinformation, Breitbart, which lovingly called COP26, quote, "a gigantic eco-fascist gaslighting operation," still had Google's ads on its site as per the report. After the report came out, Google removed all the ads from the sites that were mentioned in the report. But what are we still missing? Well, on the bright side, I actually do not have a slide with more climate fail articles. So those were all the main ones that I found in December, which means that there were way more climate victories than fails, which is good. But you know, anyways. Now let's go ahead and get on to the fossil fuel fails. Okay, so this one's kind of a fail and a victory at the same time. It features Taylor Energy, which I talked about last time because their owner Phyllis Taylor got rich off of cleanup money for the Deepwater Horizon spill and hasn't paid taxes for it, allegedly. Well, now Taylor Energy has been forced to pay $43 million in civil penalties and damages for causing the largest running oil spill in US history. And that one was not the Deepwater Horizon spill, but it actually began in 2004 off the coast of Louisiana after an offshore oil platform sank in a mudslide caused by Hurricane Ivan, breaking many underwater wells. Taylor Energy has disputed their responsibility in this and sold off their oil assets in 2008, but finally the Department of Justice has prosecuted them. In addition to the $43 million, the court has ordered the company to transfer control of the $432 million cleanup fund to the Department of Interior. Very smart considering what Phyllis did with the Deepwater Horizon money. Another fossil fuel fail is laid out by ProPublica, the Texas Tribune, and NBC News. They dove deep into U.S. government's lack of regulation on portable power generators that poison thousands every year with carbon monoxide. About 70 people in the US die every year from those things because they emit as much exhaust as 450 cars. Yet, this can be the lifeline for those who have lost power in extreme weather events, so people using them it's just getting more common. And the industry has resisted any form of regulation, so basically generator technology really hasn't improved in a long time. There'll be a link of the article in the source section, but basically if you use one of those, do not under any circumstance leave it in a closed space. That is how people die. There's also no slide section for the fossil fuel fails. So those were all the ones I found for those 2 weeks. Okay, we are finally moving on to my favorite climate victory point from December 18th to 31st, and it takes us to Chile. First big deal in Chile was that they elected a 35-year-old liberal student activist named Gabriel Boric as president. And then after declaring a climate and ecological emergency, Chile elected 155 people to write a new constitution to tackle those issues head on. A key point to note is that Chile is the second largest lithium supplier after Australia, an essential mineral for EV lithium-ion batteries. One of Boric's campaign promises was to create a national lithium mining company and to increase mining royalties and taxes. But this puts the new constitutional convention in a tight spot because they will have to navigate between the economic opportunities of mining for lithium, thereby helping the climate crisis, and preserving their local environment, thereby helping the ecological crisis. The convention will also have to decide on water rights and how that plays into mining for lithium and copper, which is another thing that they mine. I just think that the whole thing is fascinating because how often does the country rewrite its constitution? And for specifically climate and ecological crises in particular, like, that's unheard of. It's very exciting. So I will keep an eye on Chile to see what the Constitutional Convention decides. And that was the climate recap for the last 2 weeks of 2021. Which news point stood out to you? Did I miss any news points that you would like to share? Let's talk about all of that in the comment section below. Until next time, remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. I'd like to thank the people on Patreon for their incredible support. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous members David H., FK, Norman Anal, and Greg H. I greatly appreciate your support. If you would like to join the Beccasphere Patreon community, there's a link in the description below where you can check that out. Or if you would like to do a one-time donation, you can click the buy a cup of coffee link. Thank you, and I will see y'all next time. Bye. Where am I going? There.